Welcome to Poland Daily History with me, Nicholas Richardson. In the previous episode, we discussed the life of Antoni Pajdak, a socialist leader during the Second World War who after the war was persecuted by the Soviet Union for his uncompromising stance in defence of Polish sovereignty. In this episode, we will look at the Stalinist repression against his family and his efforts to help a new generation of dissidents from the 1960s onwards.
In the meanwhile, he was not allowed to communicate with his family, so his daughter, Wiesława, which we mentioned in an earlier episode, she was kept in the dark about her father's fate, whether he had survived his prison sentence, why he hadn't returned to Poland. She was living through a lot of stress. As I mentioned also in a previous episode, she herself had been sent to prison in 1947. She would be released first in 1953. She was free for 2 years between 1948 and 1950, but then sent back to prison for a second sentence and was released first in 1953. Her mother and Antoni Pajdak's wife had unfortunately also been arrested together with the daughter in 1947. During an interrogation, the Soviets claimed, or the Polish communist marionettes claimed, that she had jumped out from a window during the interrogation and she didn't survive that fall. So the family was completely broken up. The father either in a Moscow prison or working as a lumberjack in Siberia. The daughter in a Stalinist prison in Poland, and the wife who had died during very mysterious circumstances during an interrogation. So the Pajdak family was, you can say, completely crushed by the Stalinist times in Poland. After he returned to Poland in 1955, he slowly started getting involved in politics again. Of course, he wouldn't join the Communist Party. No. Instead, he worked as a lawyer, and he would help the nascent dissident movement that was starting to come to life in Poland, especially after 1968 and in the years of the 1970s. He was one of the men who joined the so-called Committee to the Defense of Workers, KOR. This was the first time when the intellectual class of Poland really united with the workers. The workers had previously gone on strike. They had fought against the communists in Poznan in 1956, for example. In 1968, there was still some. There was the so-called March events when the students started rising up. They were protesting against the government, but at that time, many of the workers considered that the students, they were spoiled brats that were creating unnecessary trouble, and they didn't really join in. But soon thereafter, there was the workers started protesting themselves, and this time there was a response from the intellectual elite, and they especially served as legal counsel for the arrested workers. And Pajdak in this form was one of the men who got very involved in that battle, you can say. As the time passed, he grew older. He was still a well-respected man, influential, and it shows that in 1982 he was attacked by the so-called nieznani sprawcy, or in English, unknown assailants, you could say, or unknown perpetrators. This was a term that was quite famous in communist Poland. Sometimes people would be murdered, sometimes people would be beaten up. The assailants would be unknown, but everybody knew that these were some form of agents of the secret police that were conducting repressive acts against the dissident movement. On a side note, it can be mentioned that today's bandits of the Legia Warsaw football club still use the name of the unknown assailants.
That's interesting.
At least they know their history, you can
yes,
say. But and they have some sense of humor, I guess. But going back to the story, 1981, of course, was the year when martial law broke out. It was later. Pajdak was assaulted and put in a hospital in March 1981. At that time, he was well above the age of 70, so they attacked an old man and sent him to the hospital. He, nevertheless, after recovering, continued his support for those people who had been arrested during martial law. Unfortunately, he passed away at the age of 81 in 1988. So it was a long, difficult life,
Yes.
and unfortunately, he was only a year away from seeing Poland regain its independence, but never really got to see it. Of course, the winds were blowing in that direction. Hopefully, he was aware that that independence, which he had fought for his entire life, was just a year or so away.
Fascinating story. Fascinating. And thank you for sharing that with us.
Thank you.
That's interesting. There we have it. A very interesting story. A man who spent his whole life fighting for the freedom of Poland and died just at the cusp of that freedom. But it was a good fight, and I'm very grateful that Adam has shared it with us. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as we have, and we look forward to seeing you again next time on Poland Daily History.